taking a look here at the newish short-term housing regulations in Burlington. So there was talk of this over the spring and summer. This was, I think, adopted by the city council here in June, signed by the mayor in July, and then became effective in August. So what changed? What are the new regulations and how does it affect people? The critical thing is that there's a couple new definitions, but probably the most important one is this definition here of a host. Host means a person who operates a short-term rental, whole or partial unit. The host is the primary contact for guests to make reservations and to contact during their stay. This means if you have a company with N different short-term rentals, you're not going to be able to orchestrate across all of those multiple rentals with a single person, at least according to this law. You're going to have this host, as you'll see later, is tied to the property and it's an individual. And yeah, critically, the host may be the property owner and we'll see later that you also need to live there. So there's also this new definition. So Burlington is now explicitly defining this short-term rental. So a short-term rental, which is later in here in STR, shall mean a dwelling unit that is rented to guests for less than 30 consecutive days and for more than 14 days during any rolling 12-month period. It is subject to the Vermont Rooms and Sales Tax and is either a partial unit, meaning a room located within a host's primary residence that is used primarily for sleeping purposes, or by human occupants, and that at least contains 70 square feet of floor area, or a whole unit, meaning an entire dwelling unit. So basically what this means is that if you are renting something for less than 30 days, and this is interesting because it also means you can't do it monthly. You can't rent for the month of February because that's actually 28 days. You could do 30-day rentals in Burlington and be immune to all of this. But if you want to do 3-day, 7-day rentals, and you want to do those for more than 14 days in any rolling 12-month period, then you must register here as a short-term rental. So anyway, let's keep going. All short-term rentals shall be subject to the following standards. All short-term rentals. And we define short-term rentals above. A host may register their primary residence as one whole unit short-term rental. What does this mean? It means if somebody wants to rent for a week, like a home in Burlington for vacation, and they want to come to Burlington with their mom and their sister and her boyfriend and their kids. And they want to have a bunch of people in a house, but they only want that house for a week or for maybe only a weekend. A host is going to have to provide that short-term housing to the person, to whoever wants to come into the city. And how can a host do that? So a host can register their primary residence, meaning if you live somewhere, you can rent out that whole thing. I guess you got to go somewhere else while they're there. But as long as it's your primary residence, you can rent it out. And you can provide that service to whoever's coming in from Airbnb or whatever. So, I don't know. Just a reminder, a whole unit short-term rental is not a partial dwelling. It could be a entire house, or it could be an apartment. If you have a duplex, it could be one of those. The other thing that they can do here is if you've got a duplex or a triplex, or really up to a quadplex, so less than five, up to a quadplex, then you can take and you live in that quadplex, then you can make one of those a short-term rental. However, if the host does not live there, So it's if you don't live there in a one unit, or if you don't live there in a multi-unit, what are your options? So a host may register a dwelling unit that is not within the same building or lot as their primary residence as one whole unit short-term rental only if the dwelling unit is indicated as a seasonal home by the Burlington assessor. Presumably, this means the Burlington assessor is going to look at your home and they're going to decide, is this a seasonal home? Can you live in this over the winter comfortably? And if the answer is yes, then it is not a seasonal home. If you can live in it comfortably over the winter, it is not a seasonal home, and therefore it is not able to be registered. However, if the dwelling unit is within a building with two or more dwelling units, and the host rents another dwelling unit within it in the same building or lot in excess of any applicable required inclusionary units that meets the affordability criteria of Article 9, whatever that is, then you may. This is really the crux of, I think, the law. I think this is what they were going for and why it got enough support. Because the idea is that if, despite the fact that we have these new hosts, and you've got to have a host that's actually going to have to accept the payment, and they're going to have to be the one that is like actually orchestrating the services, and presumably if you're like trying to get around this, you're gonna be breaking the rules, and they're gonna take your registration away. So it's not too bad. Like if you just want to rent your own home, you want to live in a home and like basically rent that, and you're just like, I'm gonna skirt the law, or not even skirt. I'm gonna live there, but I'm gonna rent it out all the time. I'll get my mail there, but I'm gonna just leave when any time it's rented and have some other apartment or another house even, but call that one my primary. You could actually do that, and you would have to be the one kind of orchestrating the stuff, and that would be fine. But if you wanted to then get a second home, if you're like, man, I'm making bank doing this one home, if I want to get a second home, then you can't really do that anymore. Getting this host, you have to hire someone to be a host, and you've got to convince them to either live there or get their mail sent there so that it's their primary residence. And you're gonna have to compensate them for doing so. And if they're not gonna live there, if you can't convince them to live there, and you can't convince them to make it their dwelling, what you could get them to do is just be a host. You could say, hey, I'm going to hire you to be a host. But if you want to do that and you already are registered, the only way to do that is to do it within a place that meets this affordability criteria for at least one of the units in here. So if you want to scale it, if you're like want to make a bunch of money in Burlington on short-term housing, you have to create affordable housing in the process. So that's part of it, but there's also a 9% tax here, and this goes to the Housing Trust Fund. So not only do you explicitly have to create affordable housing, you're also giving 9% of your gross receipts to the Housing Trust Fund. And when I was looking for a nice house in Burlington proper, like walkable to downtown, that could actually fit 4 adults and 4 kids, you're looking at like anywhere between 500, I'm really bad at that, and 1,000 per night. And that's a weekly rate of probably 4 to 6 grand. It's going to be less in the quiet time, but more in the busy time. But even if like pretty conservatively, if you're talking about 15 grand in like gross receipts in Burlington right now, you need a mortgage of about like probably 6 grand, maybe 7 grand to buy a house that can do these numbers pretty conservatively. So if you look at that, they're taking about like, it's 9%, call it 10% to be really conservative.